Hello and welcome to The World Today on Channels Television. I'm Cynthia Are. Unfortunately, we begin with news which is rather alarming. The United Nations Refugee Agency has confirmed that more than 3 million Syrians are now registered as refugees. And as if that's not bad enough, the agency has also confirmed that the crisis is escalating and not improving in the least. As a result, Syria is now facing the biggest humanitarian emergency of our era, with almost half of them having been forced to flee their homes. The majority of refugees have fled to countries neighboring Syria, with most now seeking shelter in Lebanon. More than 190,000 have been killed in Syria's 3-year civil war.
Despite Moscow's hollow denials, it is now clear that Russian troops and equipment have illegally crossed the border into eastern and southeastern Ukraine. This is not an isolated action, but part of a dangerous pattern over many months to destabilize Ukraine as a sovereign nation.
For more on this situation, I'm now being joined by the Voice of America's Sharon Ben, who will be speaking to us about the Islamic State militants. Sharon, thank you so much for speaking with us today on The World Today. I hope you can hear me, Sharon. Well, we will try to establish connection with Sharon Ben during the course of this bulletin. But for now, the Islamic State militant group, also known as IS, is no longer just a threat to Syria and Iraq, but countries like the United Kingdom. The group IS is so treacherous that UK's terror threat level is being raised from substantial to severe in response to conflicts in the earlier mentioned countries. The new alert level means an attack on the UK is highly likely, although Theresa May says there was no intelligence to suggest an attack is imminent. It is the second highest of 5 possible UK threat levels.
The situation for civilians in Syria has grown worse over the past few months, according to a briefing at the UN Security Council on Thursday.
Over the past 6 months, the plight of people in Syria has not been reduced, but has deepened. The violence and conflict continues unabated, with more deaths of women, children, and men. The social and economic fabric of the country has been ripped to shreds. According to data collected by human rights organizations from various sources, July 2014 was particularly harrowing since the start of the conflict for civilians in Syria, with over 1,000 civilian deaths and injuries. On 22 August, the High Commissioner for Human Rights issued updated casualty figures for the conflict. More than 191,000 people were killed between the onset of the conflict and April 2014. And as appalling as it is, that is a minimum number. The real death toll is likely to be much higher.
A day after another, UN reports accused Islamic State insurgents in the conflict of committing war crimes, including amputations and public executions, and that there was evidence that Damascus had used chlorine gas in combating its enemies. Kang warned that the escalation of atrocities will continue.
In the face of total impunity, grave human rights violations have become the norm in Syria. Parties to the conflict are oblivious of their obligations to protect civilians and abide by international humanitarian law, as they continue to commit terrible crimes against civilians, young and old, women and men. The perpetrators must be held accountable. The impunity must end.
The Sunni militants who are bringing weapons from Iraq have changed the power balance in Syria, consolidating control over large areas and establishing order by imposing harsh Sharia laws, the UN said in its latest reports. As Western governments contemplate airstrikes against Islamic State, Kang urged the UN to take action.
Each day results in more lives lost and more families and communities destroyed. The rise of extremist groups with complete disregard for even the most basic norms of humanity, threatens what remains of secularism and tolerance in Syria. Now more than ever before, the Council must do all it can to end the conflict and ensure that humanitarian access increases so that we can reach all those who are desperate in need in Syria. UN humanitarian agencies and our partners are doing everything we can to meet those needs, but as we have repeatedly said, the solution to the crisis does not rest with us.
Later that day, President Barack Obama met with his top official national security advisors to discuss the challenge presented by Islamic State militants and the situation in Iraq and Syria. President Barack Obama said on Thursday that he had asked officials to prepare a range of U.S. military options for confronting Islamic State militants in Syria, but said his strategy is still being developed.
Because of our strikes, the terrorists of ISIL are losing arms and equipment. In some areas, Iraqi government and Kurdish forces have begun to push them back, and we continue to be proud and grateful to our extraordinary personnel serving in this mission.
At a news conference, Obama cautioned against speculation that he was on the brink of a decision to expand airstrikes against Islamic State beyond targets already being hit in Iraq by U.S. aerial attacks.
Any successful strategy, though, also needs strong regional partners. I'm encouraged so far that countries in the region, countries that don't always agree on many things, increasingly recognize the primacy of the threat that ISIL poses to all of them. And I've asked Secretary Kerry to travel to the region to continue to build the coalition that's needed to meet this threat.
Obama is also sending Secretary of State John Kerry to the Middle East to build the coalition that is needed to meet this threat. Obama is considering launching airstrikes against Islamist targets in Syria after beheading of American journalist Jim Foley.
Now, earlier on, we did tell you that the UK has raised its alert levels based on the Islamic militant group threat, and that is part of what we're going to be talking to Sharon Ben, who is joining us now via Skype from the Voice of America newsroom. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us on The World Today. Now, I'd just like to ask you, the UK has raised its alert levels, and I'm just curious, is it only a matter of time before the United States does the same concerning the Islamic State militant group?
Well, so far they haven't done that. They've decided to keep the terrorist level the way it is. I do understand that the UK has done it, but right now they're not matching that. I think there is a lot of worry about the rise of the Islamic State. As you said, they're an incredibly brutal group. There has been speculation that Washington could attack them in Syria. I think this could get very complicated if they were to do that, Washington could be accused of siding with Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. That just makes it a very complicated political situation for Mr. Obama.
Now that you mentioned President Obama, during his speech yesterday, he also made it clear that, he would not be working with Assad in order to counter this extremist group. So could you give us an idea of what strategies he might be taking since he's not going to be working with Assad, knowing that there are threats to both Iraq, Syria, and now even probably the UK and the US?
Well, I think that everybody is very conscious of the threat. This is a group that's not any normal terrorist group. This is a group it's operating as a state with an army, as a very brutal one. And what has been done so far is a series of airstrikes. The U.S. has been continuing to conduct airstrikes against the group. And as I said, they're considering expanding those airstrikes into Syria, where the Islamic State has a large area that's under their control. That is politically very complicated. What the Obama administration is trying to do is create more regional partners that can put pressure and apply pressure. In other words, work indirectly, perhaps, rather than directly in the region, but work with different partners who could come in and work against the Islamic State.
Well, Sharon, thank you so much for speaking with us today on The World Today. I've been speaking with the Voice of America's Sharon Ben, and she's been telling us about the Islamic State militant group. Thank you so much, Sharon. Now, there might be cause to heave a sigh of relief in Iceland as the Icelandic Met Office has lowered its aviation warning from red to orange near the Badarbunga volcano, which saw an eruption begin overnight. The new alert, which is the second highest, means that aviation authorities can now decide if planes may travel over the volcano's airspace. Scientists confirmed a crane eruption 1 kilometer long started in a lava field north of the Vatnajökull glacier. The volcano has been hit by several recent tremors, and civil protection officials also confirmed that Icelandic air traffic control had closed the airspace above the eruption to a height of 5,000 feet, but now some aircraft will be able to pass over the volcano if aviation authorities give airliners the go-ahead. Now, as a result of the two disasters which occurred this year alone concerning Malaysia Airlines, the airliner has decided to cut 6,000 staff as part of the recovery plan. The reduction in staff numbers represents around 30% of its workforce of 20,000. In addition to that, the airline will become completely state-owned and a new chief executive will eventually be put in place. Investigators continue to hunt for flight MH370, the Kuala Lumpur to Beijing flight, which went missing back in March this year. The MH17 air crash in eastern Ukraine is also under investigation. The plane was shot down on the 17th of July with the loss of all 298 people on board. The recovery plan will cost about $1.9 billion, and Khazanah Nasional, the state investment company, which owns 69% stake in the troubled firm, will now take 100% ownership.
Estimation of a workforce of approximately 14,000 represents a net reduction of 6,000 staff, or a net reduction of 30% from the approximately 20,000 current staff in Ulco. The assignment and the objective of this exercise is to support a revival of a national carrier, but not at any cost. This is the key, actually.
But when we come back on The World Today, it's very unfortunate, but Senegal confirms its first Ebola case. We'll have details for you shortly. Please stay with us.
You see, life has just got easier. You stay connected to Channels TV, where news and innovations are shaping our world. Simply log on to channelstv.com to get the break.